Hi, I'm Bill Sroor from Dev Mastery, and welcome to the very first episode of Mastery Monday. This is a live show on YouTube where I try to help you improve your code and advance your career. So today, for the very first episode, I've got something interesting planned. We're going to be talking about the number one way to improve your code. And so for me, what I've found over my 20 plus year career is that the number one way to improve your code is to adopt a mindset of first make it work, then make it better. And I know that sounds a little bit cheesy and it sounds maybe like it should be on a poster. In fact, that's the kind of thing that I discovered when I was trying to figure out who said this first. So I'm pretty sure I'm not the first person who ever said, first make it work, then make it better. So I was on Google and I was looking for, okay, who came up with this phrase? And it turns out, it's a motivational poster. You can buy it from Etsy. But the reality is there's actually a lot of wisdom in this idea of first make it work, then make it better. So if you'll stick with me, I'll explain why I think that that's the number one way to improve your code and exactly how to implement this idea. And then if there's some people around, we can definitely have a chat and take some questions and go from there. So, all right. Basically, I think there are two main mistakes that lead to bad code. So the first thing is shipping the first thing that works, and the second mistake is making it better before making it work. So let me explain. So when I say shipping the first thing that works, I think if you've had any experience writing code, you know that your first solution is not always going to be your best solution in terms of clean code, quality code. You've probably experienced where you ship some code and then the next day or the next week, you kind of have an insight and go, oh, yeah, I should have done it this way. And so it's very rare that the first thing you come up with is the best code. And so that's one of the mistakes that leads to bad code. I think when we're first starting out, often we're happy that we got something to work and then off it goes and we don't bother to refactor or to improve it. So the second mistake that I think leads to bad code is trying to make it better before making it work. And what I mean by that is it sort of manifests itself in two ways. So one is you get in your head. So you try to design the perfect thing in your own mind before ever implementing anything. And that usually happens after you've been bitten by the first mistake a few times. You realize, oh, if I had just thought about this more, maybe I would have had that insight before I had to actually write or ship the code. And so you go in your head and you try to come up with the absolute perfect design before you've put any hands on keyboards and before you've implemented anything. And what can happen there is you can drive yourself into a sort of analysis paralysis. And you're never going to have perfect information, or you're never going to know what you don't know until you actually start trying to implement something. So being in your head the whole time is not as helpful as actually starting and trying to make something work first. The other way that this mistake kind of manifests itself is you prematurely generalize or prematurely abstract things out. So for example, your client tells you, okay, build me a screen where I can add products to a catalog. And you think, okay, well, so I have to add products to a catalog. So that means I probably have to interact with the database. So that means I need some kind of database interaction layer. And next thing you know, you're writing your own custom database interaction framework and you're giving it all kinds of bells and whistles, etc. And then it's like the day before the deadline and you haven't even started on the adding product screen because you've been so focused on building this abstraction because you feel like you're really going to need that and it's super important. And then you rush the last bit and your abstraction is probably wrong because you did it before you had any real use for it besides one use case which you hadn't even coded yet. So I really think adopting that mindset of first make it work, then make it better is actually going to save you from these two really, really common mistakes. And so two questions sort of come up. The first is, how do we know our code works? So if we say, okay, first make it work, well, what does work mean? And how do we know that the code is actually working? And I think that the best way to know that your code works, in fact, probably the only way to know that your code works is to test it, right? You're going to try it out. And so you have two options there. You can either test it manually, just run through the scenario, or you can automate the test. And I would say to you, if you automate the test, chances are you're going to be in a much better position because with an automated test, you're going to end up going a lot faster and you're going to be able to refactor and improve your code more quickly because you won't have to worry about manually stepping through and ensuring that you haven't broken anything. And so then the next question is, how do we make working code better? Okay, so you've got a test. You're running the test is passing, so you know that your code works. So what do we mean by better, and how do we make code better? So that's going to be really one of the main topics of this show. So why I'm doing this Mastery Monday show every Monday at 10 p.m. live is so that we can talk about all of the various ways that we can actually improve your code, make it better. But for now, I'll just give you some general advice. So generally speaking, code is better when it's easy to change, or more specifically, when you can change the code without breaking things. So the worst kind of code is code where as the second you touch it, you break your entire app. So your goal in making the code better is trying to make it easier to change. And so you can imagine there's a whole bunch of things that go into that. So, if it's more readable, it's easier to understand, then it's going to be easier to change. If it's more independent, it's also going to be easier to change without breaking things. And obviously, if you have a good set of tests around it, it's going to be easier to change without breaking things. So that's what we mean when we talk about making it better in general. For specifics, I'd love you to tune in next Monday and the following Mondays after that, because we're going to be getting into a lot more specific examples of how to take working code and improve it and make it better. I'm going to show you lots of tips and tricks as time goes on. But for now, let's talk about how would we apply this idea of first make it work, then make it better in real life. So the way I do it, and the way that I recommend you try, is you first need to write a test that describes the behavior from the point of view of the end user of your code. And the end user of your code might be like an actual end user of the application, or it might be another developer. It just depends on what type of code you're writing. So if you're writing an API versus creating the front end or creating some kind of a web interface. But the point is, you need to write an automated test, and you should write it from the point of view or from the perspective of your end user. And that test should describe the behavior of your code. So one of the things that I hear and I see often is developers are not sure exactly how to go about writing a test until they've actually created the code that they're trying to test, because they need to understand the implementation in order to be able to test it. And that's because you're testing the wrong thing. So what you want to be testing is the behavior of your code. So what the code does versus how it does it. And again, in future episodes, I'll go into pretty deep into actually testing and how to write that kind of test. But the point is, in real life, the first thing you should have in your back pocket is a test that sort of proves that your code works. So an automated test that describes the behavior from the point of view of the user, so you can know with confidence when the code is working and when you've broken it. The next thing you want to do is hack your way to green. So you want to get to a passing test as quickly as possible. And when I say hack, I mean like you can break any rule you want, copy paste from Stack Overflow, pull stuff out of docs, whatever you need to do in order to get your code to pass the test as quickly as possible. That's what you should do. And once you have working code, it's not good code yet, but it's working code, then you can check that into your repository, and you now have a fallback position, a failsafe. And so what that does for you is it gives you sort of mentally, it's a little bit of space, because, in the real world, you're going to be working against deadlines. You're going to want to make things perfect. You're not going to have time to make things perfect. And you're definitely not going to be in a mode to think of or come up with or implement the best solution if you're under a tremendous amount of pressure. You've got a deadline looming and you've just got to get the thing out the door. But if you've got a passing test, if you have code that works, it may not be great, but you've got code that works and it's checked in, that frees you, takes away a little bit of stress. And now you've got time to go in and try to refactor that code and improve that code. And you've got the test at your back that's going to tell you when you've broken something, so you can get that back to green with a little bit better version, check it in, get it back to green with a little bit better version, check it in, and keep iterating like that until your deadline hits. And even in this case, if you have a really tight deadline and you've shipped something that's really suboptimal, you can go back when there's some downtime, because you've got that test at your back. You can go back and try to improve it, make it better, and refactor even after you've shipped the initial version. So that's the idea. You refactor, That's third step. You refactor, you ship, and then after that, you refactor some more until you've got really clean code that you're proud of, that you're happy with. And so, one of the resources that I can recommend that you check out if you're interested in what I mean by refactor, there's refactoring.com, which is something that's put out by a very well-known developer, Martin Fowler, and he's got there a whole list and with examples of different refactorings that you can do. We'll also be covering some of those in future episodes here on Mastery Mondays, Mondays at 10 p.m. So that's really what I wanted to talk about today, is the number one way to improve your code, which, like I said, is you first make it work, then make it better.